Sometimes in life, you learn more from failures than you do from successes. So, in that spirit, today I bring you the Las Vegas Monorail. This is City Nerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics, more than welcome, although to be honest, I'm just as likely to take your comment and spin it in a totally different direction. I've had a couple that touch on resort trams or theme park monorails. Like this one from Nicholas Barnett, who laments the lack of a Las Vegas monorail airport extension. And the reply from Tony Walters, who points out the outsized power of taxi companies when it comes to airport rail. That's all well and good, but we just need to talk about this monorail because to me, it's exhibit 1A of how you should not be doing transit in a metro area of 2 million plus. To be clear, the strip itself has always had bus service, but it's always operated in mixed traffic. Before the pandemic hit, RTC was running both the Deuce, which makes all local stops on Las Vegas Boulevard and is the highest ridership bus line in Vegas, and the Strip to Downtown Express, or SDX, which also runs the length of the Strip to downtown with limited stops, and was the second busiest bus route. The SDX was discontinued at the beginning of the pandemic and hasn't been restored yet. But for the most recent year, I have data. The Deuce was doing 9 million passenger trips a year, and the SDX was doing 5 million. These are big numbers for bus routes. Just to underline the point, the combined annual ridership pre-pandemic of just these two routes on the Strip was higher than the entire bus systems of Cincinnati Go Metro, Ride KC, and Indigo. This is just to give you an idea of the level of transportation demand you're getting on what's one of the biggest tourism and employment corridors on the planet. And we haven't even talked about the monorail yet, which is another 5 million trips or so. Before we get there though, the other thing the Strip has had, at least for as long as I've been visiting, is trams or people movers or whatever you want to call them. Currently, there are 3 of them on the west side of the Strip. Let's start with the Mirage to Treasure Island tram, which in my experience is by far the most useless. The route is less than a quarter mile, so this is replacing an extremely doable walking trip, which you probably wouldn't make anyway since, who goes to the Treasure Island anymore? Anyway, the tram was out of service on my most recent field trip, so I don't have any footage to share. Moving south, there's the Aria Express, which runs closer to half a mile and connects the Bellagio, the Park MGM, and all the city center properties, including the Aria. It opened in 2009, and it has 2 tracks that each carry a train that runs both directions. The trains are 4 cars, they have a capacity of 132 people. The frequency varies, but there was a train about every 4 minutes when I visited recently, and it has real-time information to let you know when the next train is coming. So the frequency is good, but you do have to walk all the way to the back of the Bellagio or the Park MGM to catch the train, and that's sort of a recurring theme with these services. And then south, across Tropicana, there's the Mandalay Bay tram, which runs a little over half a mile and has stops at the Excalibur, the Luxor, and the Mandalay Bay, and also has an uncharacteristically convenient stop right at the southwest corner of the Strip in Tropicana. This one is also a dual track system, and the trains can have different stop patterns depending on the time of day. The trains carry about 160 passengers, and they were running about every 6 minutes on my most recent visit. But again, that'll vary. I do like this one just because it really is a super convenient way to get to Mandalay Bay from the Ped Bridges at Tropicana. But man, they need help with their network map. This one's hard to look at, and the longer I stare at it, the less it makes sense. Anyway, the point here is bus services on the Strip do have pretty strong ridership, especially given that they operate in mixed traffic. But if you want evidence of how much latent demand there is for proper fixed guideway transit on the Strip, I'd say look no further than the fact that there are multiple privately built automated systems that the resorts themselves operate for free. And that brings us to the Las Vegas Monorail, which in its original form beginning in 1995 wasn't much different from the 3 services we just talked about. It was a 1-mile fixed guideway system connecting 2 properties. the MGM Grand and Bally's, with the stations at the back of each property, similar to the Aria Express. The original trains on the system were literally refurbished Walt Disney World monorail trains, and if this is where the story had ended, well, fair enough. But in 1997, the state of Nevada, in its infinite wisdom, passed legislation that allowed for a private company to own, manage, and charge fares, operating the monorail as a public transit system. In 2000, the Las Vegas Monorail Company, a nonprofit public benefit corporation, was formed. It acquired the monorail system and upgraded and expanded it to about 4 miles with 7 stops. The expanded monorail opened in July 2004. The monorail had all kinds of trouble hitting ridership projections and revenue targets, and we'll get into why in a minute. But the Las Vegas Monorail Company filed for Chapter 11 twice, once in 2010 and then again in 2020 after the pandemic hit. In late 2020, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority purchased the monorail for around $24 million, and LVCVA is the current operator. One interesting aspect of the transaction was that it included eliminating a geographic non-compete zone around the monorail, which now allows alternative transit providers to construct and operate facilities along the monorail alignment. Remember, the intention here was that the monorail be a legitimate public transit service, situated along one of the highest ridership potential corridors you can imagine. It's one of the world's busiest airports at one end, downtown at the other end, and in between, a street that's just loaded with enormous resorts that are massive trip generators, both in terms of tourism and employment. Every single one of these resorts has just a behemoth employee parking facility. So how does it work as transit? Well, let's see for ourselves. We're going to take the monorail all the way from the south terminus, the MGM Grand, to the north end of the line. From the Ped Bridge on the east leg of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard, we're going to enter the MGM Grand and get down the escalator to ground level. Okay, so I've taken the monorail before, and I know it's toward the back of the casino, but casinos are notoriously designed to throw off your sense of direction and keep you captive, so I'm just gonna follow the signs. So lots of destinations on the first sign, but no sign of the monorail. Next sign, well, I'm making good progress toward Top Golf, but not sure about the monorail. Another wayfinding sign, I'm definitely on my way to Wet Republic. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. And the district, is that before or after the monorail? There's just no way of knowing. Still no sign of the monorail, but behold, a map. And then I get a sign that actually has the monorail listed, so I'm feeling pretty confident at this point. But okay, now I'm all the way to the pool, and I know that's gotta be past the monorail, so did I miss it? At this point, I actually had to look at the picture of the map I took just so I could backtrack and figure out where the monorail was supposed to be. And sure enough, it's not on the wayfinding sign, but if you squint, you can see it's actually obscured behind this black curtain. So when you finally get there, you find out it's $5. Who charges $5 for transit outside of like London? And look at the turnstiles. I mean, I guess I can imagine a fight letting out at Grand Garden Arena and there's a mad rush for the exits. But are the type of people who pay $1,000 plus for a fight ticket really riding the monorail? You take an escalator up to the platform and wait for the train to arrive, and oh, did I mention this was NFL draft weekend? Okay, so let's walk through how what we just experienced stacks up against what we know about the fundamentals of good transit service. 1, transit should be visible and legible. It should be right at the front door of your big trip generators, and you shouldn't need a map to find it. So that's strike 1. Another thing is you want your transit line to capture as much trip-intensive land use as possible within, say, quarter-mile catchment areas around each station. Well, the monorail is only capturing the resorts on the east side of the strip. If the stations were oriented on, I don't know, the center line of the roadway all the resorts face onto, you'd more than double your ridership potential just on proximity alone. So strike 2. And finally, this is a north-south line, so you want seamless transfers to your east-west services. RTC runs busy bus lines on Sahara, Flamingo, and Tropicana. Well, the monorail doesn't interface with anything at street level. You have to walk through casinos to access it. And also, it's a completely separate agency on a different fare system, so there's no free transfer. That's strike three, and I'm probably just scratching the surface. But here's the key thing with the monorail. It's a privately owned public transportation system. It's kind of an oxymoron. The alignment, the station locations, the fare structure, how it operates, all the elements were conceived as a privately run operation to benefit the resorts. So if the goals of good transit are to make public transportation visible, frictionless, and integrated with the regional network, well, those are in conflict with the principles of casino design, which are basically to lure you inside and then make it as difficult as possible for you to find the way out. Call it the Hotel California School of Interior Design. So for the people who think the public sector is a bloated, incompetent bureaucracy and big transit investments are better left to the nimble, efficient, innovative private sector, let me just sum it up. Confusing design with bad connectivity and ridiculously high fares leads to falling way short of ridership projections, leads to missing your revenue targets, leads to Chapter 11, twice. I'm going to talk about regional planning and the future of transit on the Strip, but first, quick reminder to drop a like on the video if you're enjoying this transit fiasco. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're looking for 10 to 20 minutes on cities and transportation in your life every week. Check out Nerd Patreon if you're looking for more direct ways to support the channel. And weekly sub count check. We now have enough subscribers to fill Lone Depot Park, home of the Miami Marlins. You know, I'm just gonna put it out there. The plural of Marlin is just Marlin, but it's Florida. Fortress Marlin is protected by a sturdy perimeter of parking structures, and shockingly, it did not get a mention in my top 10 urbanist ballparks video. So the pandemic has been awful, but one silver lining is it's created an opportunity for a sort of reset, for cities to see themselves in new ways, for people to imprint new behaviors. The NFL draft was originally scheduled to take place in Vegas in 2020, but COVID-19 pushed it to 2022, and they actually closed part of the Strip to traffic during the weekend of the draft. And the public response was super interesting. People loved the freedom of just being able to walk across without having to find a ped bridge, and even one of the Clark County commissioners got on board. So things change. Economic conditions, housing and transportation affordability, how people view climate change and energy use, how people see the universe of possibilities in their city. In an ideal world, transit planning is done holistically at a regional level with a long-range horizon and not piecemeal by private interests. And of course, like all US metropolitan areas, Las Vegas has a metropolitan planning organization, the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, which is also the primary transit operator. As an MPO, RTC looks at transportation and land use in a coordinated way. And over the past 20 years, there have been several planning efforts that address transit on the Strip. You had the Regional Fixed Guideway Study of 2005, and then the Transportation Investment and Business Plan of 2016, which recommended a light rail line from the airport along the Strip to downtown. Although the resort owners apparently had a lot of heartburn over the possibility of catenary posts and wires creating visual clutter on the Strip. I mean, that is pretty comical. They have been to the Strip, right? The onboard mobility plan of 2020 took this idea and refined it, envisioning a European-style tram operating in mixed traffic, which is pretty disappointing. More recently, the Clark County Commission basically ignored all of it and unanimously approved the Vegas Loop, a 29-mile network of tunnels for small, low-occupancy vehicles. It's been very tough to get the region unified behind one vision, and when you don't have that, you do get a very unsatisfactory piecemeal approach. As for the monorail, it's probably being kind to say its future is in question. Even as recently as the 2016 business plan, there was a laundry list of recommended monorail extensions, really doubling down on a core alignment that's really completely flawed as a piece of public transit. But with increasing talk of rail transit on the Strip and now an awkward pivot to taxi tunnels, it's hard to imagine any monorail extensions getting built. So it's not clear what the preferred solution is right now. I guess it's high capacity transit vehicles operating in mixed traffic on the Strip with expensive tunneling for low capacity vehicles underneath the Strip. It seems like nonsense. It's like bizarro anti-planning. Isn't the obvious answer to run actual grade separated transit right on the central line of Las Vegas Boulevard, capturing the huge trip generators of the quarter-mile walkshed? I'm agnostic on whether it's underground or elevated, but don't give me this stuff about visual clutter. Visual clutter is the Strip's brand. Just embrace your identity. Wrap all the vehicles in like LED displays, sell tons of advertising, and elevate the whole thing above a car-free Las Vegas Boulevard. Okay, that's all I got. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. Thanks again to all the patrons who are coming on board. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.